Welcome back to another video, folks. This time we are talking axle housings and axles in general. Today's video we're going to particularly look at the differences between the Boom Racing V2 Scale Phat axles and the Boom Racing BRX90 scale axles. So we're going to look at the difference between them. Now there's a substantial price difference between them. So that does show itself in the product itself. So now some of these I have already taken screws out and done some stuff too, just to make it easier to show you. Because for instance, these Scale Phat axles have a substantial amount of screws that actually hold the axle housing together. Whereas the BRX90 axles are fairly simple to disassemble. So we're going to take the camera and zoom it in ever so slightly, just so that we can pick up more detail. At least that's what I'd like to do. So as you can see, these are the exact same length pin to pin. Now the axle shaft itself is longer on the V2 Scale Phat axle. So you can see the threaded part sticks out substantially farther than what the other axles do. I'm going to say probably roughly, I can get an exact measurement if you guys want it, but I'm going to say 2 millimeters on each side, something like that. There's definitely a difference there. So first things first, we're going to look at both the front and rear of these axles so that you can see the difference between them. So the Scale Phat axles I have already taken the screws out of and disassembled for you. This is the internals to one of those. Stainless steel shaft, and the interesting part is you can see the empty bearing slots. Now these come with shielded bearings. They are not sealed bearings. Okay, the grease you see is factory. I didn't touch these. This is how they came. As you can see, that's just a shielded cheap bearing. Okay, now with that being said, I did bring sealed bearing just to show you that you can take and install this bearing to add support to that drive, the axle shaft itself. Of course, you got to get everything to drop down into its home, and right there we go. You can see that you can install bearings there, which I would suggest. I haven't seen too many people have very good luck with these particular axles when put in stressful situations repeatedly. They just tend to fail. But knowing that that extra bearing place is inside there, I would utilize that. I would also change out the outer bearings. Now, the reason I'm going to say that they just went shielded through everything is because of the design of this. This is more like your Yoda 2 axle design, where it splits down the center and bolts together. So, it is a helicoil design in the teeth, okay? So it is a stronger design. But let's compare that to this hammer right here, okay? And we're also going to show you some parts out of an AR-44 to compare. This is the BRX90 axle. There is also a BRX70 axle, which is smaller. The thing to also note about these axles is you can flip things and do so much things with them. We're going to talk about that too real directly here, because these are very versatile. So let's get these 4 screws out. As soon as we get these 4 screws out, this axle housing just kind of opens itself up. Okay, So, there's those 4 screws. These other screws, all you need to do is these 4 screws that you're seeing here. These other screws can stay in place. They're there for nothing more than looks, as you can tell. Okay, now this is an AR-44 insert. All right. So, as you can see, that is a locker from an AR-44. That's the boom keyed locker. Anyone that knows that knows that it is tough as hell. Okay, you can beat the living hell out of it. I do. I beat it up fairly hard in my TF2, and that's the way it is. All right, and the front simply pops off after removing them 4 screws. What you're going to see is you can actually take and flip which side this is on. That'll let you run different setups with different rotations. Okay, you can actually change the axle rotation. Depends on what your build is. It's real versatile, okay? So, of course, that just goes right back into place, and them 4 screws. So whenever you tighten them 4 screws down, you're tightening down straight through all that. Okay, it's sucking everything tight. But as you can see, I mean, that's beef, okay? That is beefy. We look at the size difference. All right. I mean, you're talking double the amount of length on these teeth compared to these ones, okay? Also a difference in metal quality throughout the entire thing. So let's continue and go a little farther. Clean off my tool here a little bit, get a little grease on it. That is factory grease, by the way. That's not me doing that. That is what is in there from the factory. I need to wipe it out and get rid of it before I utilize it. But I'll put my own grease in there. So, I'm just going to take off one side of this one. Then we're going to move on. Okay, so just like an AR-44, it's like a lockout setup. And you're just going to pull. So we got our catch there. Quite beefy, quite nice. Double bearing, one on the outside, one down on the inside. They are all sealed bearings. Of course, the inner bearings are your normal open differential bearings. So, I brought out a SCX-10-2 normal AR-44 axle shaft. That is the actual axial one. As you can see, there is a difference. Okay? So, just know that they are not an exact replacement. So, you're not going to get that shaft into that. So you're not. So, just so you're aware of it, okay, you're going to have to get the ones exactly for this axle housing. So, that is the rear. If you have any questions at all on the front or rear of these, please let me know in the comments, and I will definitely search them up for you. I'm going to try to keep this video somewhat short, so I'm going to reassemble all this off camera. If you want an assembly on camera, you know what to do. Drop it in the comments, and we can show you disassembly and reassembly. I don't have a problem with it. So now we're really going to dig into the front, okay? Because the front of these fat axles, the rear of it is, you know, it's okay. The V2 fat axle rear is not terrible. Now I will tell you, tons of people break this. This is the cheapest metal I think you can find known to man. They do have a low profile one, and they have a real nice machined one. This is just some pot metal junk right here. Essentially, it's a truss. But you can buy that, and it just bolts on. I think it's 10 bucks or 12 bucks, and you can replace them. I highly recommend that. I don't recommend using the factory one that comes on these at all, because it is such cheap metal, and it is guaranteed to break, especially if you're trying to run like a D110 or any kind of truck with any kind of weight to it. So, now the front of these, and I'm not going to to dig into this too much because, quite frankly, well, I will do this. I will. We'll go ahead and now I have the BRX90. The other thing I did want to show you is, you can actually take the mount off. You can flip everything around on this. You can take this, flip it. You can do all kinds of stuff with these axles. It is truly amazing. You can also do behind the axle steering with this one. All you do is take these. These are screwed on. The machining in these is very nice. Take these, you flip them. There's a lot of possibilities here, folks. I'm not telling you that this is the axle you have to have. Quite frankly, I love AR44s, but this is very nice. Okay, now they do have a price tag on them. This is like $150. So now that's loaded. You're done. You literally have the axle you can put in. It's extremely durable. Has AR44 internals, and it's the same metal. Like, these are not obviously AR44 exact replacements, but it's actually stronger in a sense because look at the thickness of that. Okay, the tang on this one gets bigger as it gets to the tang, but the actual shaft length, which I don't know anyone really that's broken one of these back in here, but this metal is thicker the whole way through, and this is a quality metal. This is a higher end metal from Boom. It's their badass metal. Their badass metal is extremely durable if you don't know anything about it. Okay, now this is where, I'll tell you what, I'll go ahead and pop this apart real quick. Actually, I'll do this one because I already had it apart once just to pre-do this video. Because we're already at 12 minutes and I want to keep this one, not too terribly long for you guys. Of course, the internals are the exact same on this. You could also install the overdrive gear set. So, of course, this has brass bushing inserts. One goes in, the top goes in that way, the way you see it. It'll come out with it when you take it out. The other one is in the opposite direction. Okay? So, pop that out. I'm going to leave the drive shaft or the axle in place. I'm going to pop out the brass bushing so we don't lose it. And then I'm going to pull the drive shaft, the axle shaft, sorry. Keep wanting to say drive shaft for some reason. All right, now we're going to take, and I will lay these side by side as well. As you can see, the same difference. There is a difference that exists. Now, it's more subtle, and the shaft itself does slide into place, but you cannot put it together without resistance. I'm going to say if you probably took and cut the back of the tang off, it would probably go together and your axle housing would probably fit. I don't want to say 100%. I haven't tried it yet, but it all but goes together. So, it's like a millimeter off. Literally, that's all it is. So there's a good chance, our length of the actual end of this is the same. So everything looks like it would line up and work there. So I believe it's just that it's not letting it go back, slide back in far enough because of how long that tang is. So that's, that's what's outside of that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and, since I only have a couple screws out of this one, we're just going to go ahead and reassemble it real fast here. So I got to put the bottom one in first. Okay. So the bottom brass bushing goes in. Man, I hate trying to do this stuff on camera. And then after that, it'll push together. That'll hold that bottom brass bushing in place. Put the top piece in. Of course, whenever you do these axles, you do want to Loctite. And make sure you only get the Loctite on the part that's going to actually thread itself. Don't get it on the brass bushings or anything like that. But I highly, highly, highly recommend blue Loctite. So that's that. Alright. And that's that. So now we're going to dig into the front of this Phat axle. So that I can show you more about it. Of course, whenever it separates, you can see it's got that same design. Two-piece. Of course, the gearing's the same as the rear. But, folks, this is where this really, just the design of this axle loses me in general because of the way things are offset. If we look at the difference between this axle and this axle. Okay, first thing we notice is the offset of the actual knuckle itself. Okay, our C-hub to our knuckle, everything is slightly offset there, which, you know, it's not a scary thing. It's not anything of that nature, but it just catches my eye weird, I guess you could say. Beyond that, things even get more weird, and I'm only going to do one side of this as well. And mind you, whenever this axle came, these screws were finger tight. This is off this axle set for this is actually off of my D110 Boom Racing truck. And you're going to see a review on it very shortly, but here you can already see some of the concerns. And I know these axles fairly well. I don't really need to run them. I've seen enough stuff on them. But, I mean, parts for them are extremely cheap, but it's just a real weird design to it. Of course, we got a brass, some kind of brass or some kind of lower grade metal inside of our universal. So, and then on top of that, now since we undid one side, I can honestly go ahead and pop out the other side. So we have super small bearings. Okay, and I mean that is super small bearings. It's like an RC four-wheel drive design bearing right there. So that is that. I mean, that tells you some of the story right there. Now, we also see, and I did have the bearings, them same bearing spots. You can do the exact same thing as the rear, drop in larger bearings, which the front really need the help. They need all the support they can get, especially with them small bearings on the outer part of that. So I would highly suggest that if you have these axles, drop in the larger bearings. It has a spot for them. You might as well utilize it. Okay, you can see it right there. Right there. So that's the differences between some axles here. Now there's a substantial price difference between those axles, but you can see right there's our bearing holes. Bam, bam. Utilize them, folks. You might as well. It'll only help in durability. So that is pretty much a summary of those two axles. Of course, the BRX90 axles are quite a bit stronger, quite a bit better designed, but the price difference is fairly substantial. You can pick up the Scale Phat axles for roughly just over $100 for the pair. Okay, know offhand that you are going to need to replace this truss setup, which is roughly $10 or $12. I can't remember if that's a piece or a pack of two. Either way, it's cheap. You're still only talking $130 for the set of the pair of axles with everything you need. So, you know, take that for what it's worth. And I have seen people run these axles for a decent while after doing that, you know, and they seem to be fairly decent. If you have any questions on these axles whatsoever, you know how to hit me up. Drop it in the comments. We will definitely give you all the information we have, and we'll go from there. So they do have brass inserts in those as well, just so you know. So they were thinking that far ahead. But hope you folks take care, be safe, support Dixieland RC, RC Addict, and Darkside 3D Printing. They're all great places. Appreciate you folks tuning in. Take care, everyone.